All right, you got this. Let's learn some math.
Okay, so this methods and meanings page is about solving quadratic equations in two different ways, solving through factoring and then also the quadratic formula. This slide deals with solving via factoring. So I've got a factoring method that I use, and I've also got a picture of the graph that we should be coming up with. So we should be able to find our solutions are at -2 and at 5 if you look up here. So let's check and see how we do this with our method. Now, this is based on the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. So that's what we're going to use for factoring. All right, we'll keep the y equals there just so you have it. Now, what I do is I'm going to look in the coefficient for the first term equals 1, and it has to because there's nothing there. It couldn't be 0 because we wouldn't even have a term there. So we have a coefficient of 1. Our b equals -3. So this is our b. And this is our a with a 1 there. And then our c equals -10. So what I've done is I use this thing called the diamond method. I love it, and there's other ways. Some people like to do guess and check, which is totally fine, but piece of advice. If you use guess and check, make sure you actually check it, because students often make a mistake by putting the wrong sign. It could be a plus instead of a minus or a minus instead of a plus in a set of parentheses, which will totally screw up your answer. So on this one, we're looking, and this is just a graphic organizer, this particular diamond method that we're doing. And that's because it helps us organize the numbers we're choosing and working with. First of all, you have to figure out what is a times c. Well, a times c in this case is -10. So I'm going to put -10 in there. And then what is b? Well, b is -3. So we have to come up with, and I'm going to pick a different color here so it stands out a little bit more. We have to come up with two numbers that multiply to a times c, but add up to b. So multiply to -10, add up to -3. And you can sit there and you can go, okay, 5 times 2. Well, 5 times 2 is 10, and it adds up to 7, so it's not working. But what if I did 5 times -2? Well, 5 times -2 would give me -10, but it would add up to a +3. So that means we need a +2 and a -5. Well, -5 times a +2 equals -10, which is what we're looking for. -5 plus 2 equals -3, which is what we're looking for. So that means we come down here. Oh, let me get back to a different color. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. Just scratch that out. I'm going to go y equals, and then I'm just going to take these two numbers and put them into parentheses. That means x minus 5 and x plus 2. Now, what they mean when they say solve for them, we're not done here. We've got them in the factors, but now we need to set each one equal to 0 to find out what the x value would be. So x minus 5 equals 0. We would add 5 to both sides. So x equals 5. X plus 2 equals 0. We would subtract 2 from each side, so x would equal -2. So our two solutions are going to be at 5, 0 if we've done it right, and -2, 0. So let's go back and look at our graph. And it looks like we're correct. This one is -2, 0. And this one is 5, 0. So we are correct in how we solved it. That is pretty much how you solve through factoring. And in 2 slides, after we talk about the quadratic formula, you're going to have a slide that has you practicing some of the factoring. And you're going to be able to stop the video, practice it, and then start the video again and see if you got the answers right. So there we go. Have a good one. On to the quadratic formula, the ruler of all quadratics. Okay, so we're using the same equation that we used on the factoring, so we should still come up with the same answers. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about it with the quadratic formula. I had already spoken with you on the previous slide that a equals 1, b equals -3, and c equals -10. Now, one thing I want to say about the quadratic formula will solve all quadratics, but many teachers will not allow you to use the quadratic formula all of the time because there's some really important things that you need to solve and understand about factoring. And factoring often is way easier than doing the quadratic formula, but you can always use the quadratic formula to verify your answer or find ones that are trickier and more difficult to factor. But make sure it's okay with your teacher. I know that I was a teacher that would always, some problems you were allowed to factor, or some problems you had to factor, and then others I permitted the quadratic formula for. But the quadratic formula is also based on the ax squared plus bx plus c. So that's why I've pointed out what each of those things are. So what we're going to do is we're going to use all of those and we're going to plug them into this equation. And you're going to see me over parenthesize things, and it's a good thing we have some negatives here that will help us with what I'm trying to tell you when we get into it. So first off, I'm going to write, let me get a better, I'm going to go ahead and get white on this one. I just think it's going to help. Okay, here we go. All right, so I start out with x equals. Then I have my negative b. So it's going to be negative -3, okay? And that's, I'm getting that from this right here, okay? Oops, it's still white. I'm getting that there. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to go plus or minus under the radical. I'm going to put -3 in parentheses squared minus 4, and then I'm going to put times 1 in parentheses and times -10 in parentheses. Really important because this gets tricky when you start doing order of operations and multiplying negatives, and it's just really, it's really important to kind of break it up so you can see what's going on. And then this is all over 2 times a, which in this case is 1. So now I'm just going to go ahead and solve through it. So I'm going to say 3 because that is what this would be once I distribute the negative. Then it's going to be plus or minus. Sorry, my lovely pen went into a marker because it's my fault. All right, underneath we will have 9 because -3 squared is 9. Then a -4 times 1 times a -10 is a positive 49, or positive 40, I'm sorry, plus 40. And it's going to be all over 2, okay? This is kind of a nice one because you're going to see quickly how it works. So 3 plus or minus the square root of 49. And 49 is a perfect square. So I'm going to take this up here and I'm going to continue it. So x is going to equal 3 plus or minus 7 because the square root of 49 is 7. Now we're going to break these up. X equals 3 plus 7 over 2, which and then x equals 3 minus 7 over 2. Okay, well, 3 plus 7 is 10. 10 over 2, x equals 5. Well, if you remember, 5, 0 was the correct one on the last page when we were doing this. Then we have 3 minus 7, which is a -4. Well, a -4 divided by 2 is a -2. So our solutions are correct. This would be 5, 0, and this would be -2, 0. So hopefully that helps. And again, in a couple pages, you're going to have some practice problems to work through. So I think this methods and meanings is really helpful, and you'll be seeing and using factoring the quadratic formula all of Algebra 2. So stick with it. Come back to this video if you need to practice and have it explained again, but I am here to help. So there we go. Okay, so I'm going to have you pause the screen here and have you practice these if you were wanting to. I'm going to give you just a couple seconds to go ahead and make sure you can pause it, and then you will see the solutions if you keep going. So here goes. Okay, so you'll see I kind of just taught this whole thing when we were talking earlier about the factoring, solving quadratic equations through factoring. I wrote out here what the coefficients here are. A equals 1, B equals 4, and C equals 3. And then I picked, so then my A times C is 3, my B is 4. So two numbers that multiply to 3 and add up to 4 are 3 and 1. So then I just write out x plus 3 and x plus 1. Whatever makes those parentheses equal 0 is what you're going to put down for the solution for x. So on this particular equation down here, it's a little different. I'm not going to go ahead and use the diamond method because I don't have a C, but I can just factor out what's common to both terms. So I took out a negative 2x. If I take a negative 2x out of negative 4x squared, that leaves me with 2x, because those, if you multiply them by each other, they get back up to negative 4x squared. But then if I take a negative 2x out of 10, that leaves me with a negative 5, because negative 5 times a negative 2x equals a positive 10. So then it comes down to just whatever makes each of those phrases or expressions equal 0. Well, the only number that's going to make this one equal 0 actually is 0. And then if you set this one equal to 0 and solve for x, you get x equals 5 over 2. So that's the answer for that one. This particular problem up here, what I did is I started by taking this negative out, which you can see I rewrote the equation with the negative on the outside. That changes the a and b and c all to positives, which is just easier to work with. So I still left the negative here, but I went up here. I said a times c is 13, b is 14. So two numbers that multiply to 13 add up to 14, or 13 and 1. So then it just becomes x plus 13 and x plus 1. And that means that the x equals negative 13 and x equals negative 1, because that's what would make the parentheses evaluate to a 0. Okay, the final one's a little trickier because we have a coefficient that's not 1. So I still use the diamond method to get started, but I also split apart the middle term once I come up with my numbers. Well, my a is 2, b is negative 1, and c is negative 3. So I'm going to multiply what two numbers multiply to negative 6 and add up to a negative 1? Negative 3 and 2. So I've got those. Those are the two numbers I'm going to use. I come down here and I'm breaking apart this middle term, because if I was to re-add them together, it would equal negative x. Sorry, I have a garbage truck outside my window right now, and there's no way to mute that. So I'm just going to keep going. Okay, so what I do here is I split those apart. So now I have 4 terms. And notice I've used plus 2x and minus 3x. Then I put a line through it because I want to factor each half of the equation. So when I factor the first half of the equation, I take a 2x out. That leaves me with an x plus 1. Then I go over here to factor the second half of the equation. I can take a negative 3 out of both, and that is x plus 1. X plus 1 is only a factor of this equation once. So I crossed those out. If you'll see what I did there, I crossed them out, wrote this one down here. Then I look at what's left after the crossed out, and that's 2x minus 3. So I write 2x minus 3 down here. Again, we need to figure out what's going to make each set of parentheses evaluate to 0. Well, that's negative 1 on the first set of parentheses and a positive 3/2 on the second set of parentheses. So that actually finishes up the explanation of the factoring practice, and hopefully you've got a better grasp on one of the ways to solve a quadratic equation. And on to the next practice page. So this particular page will have the answers in just a moment, but I'm going to ask you to pause the video at this point so you can get a chance to work these out with the quadratic formula, which is up here. And then you will see the answers in a few minutes. So pause the video, work on the equations, then go ahead and hit play, and you will see the solutions. So this will show you the 2 different problems that I selected for you to practice. You will notice that up here, I put the A, B, and C. And as I go down, I'm just plugging things in, but you'll notice I also am over parenthesizing to make sure that I get all of the negatives taken care of and multiplied correctly. So I get down here to 7 plus or minus the square root of 49 plus 64. That is 7 plus or minus the square root of 113 over 4. 113 cannot be simplified any farther, so you would rewrite this as x equals 7 plus root 113 over 4, and x equals 7 minus root 113 over 4. This is also acceptable as a final answer. So you will just check with your teacher when you are writing things out. This particular problem ends up coming down to solutions that we could have actually done through factoring, but I plugged in I've got my A is 3, B is negative 10, and C is 3. And I've gone through, plugged in all of my information. I've gotten down here to 10 plus or minus the square root of 100 minus 36, which is the square root of 64, you see here. That means it's 10 plus or minus 8 over 6. So one of the solutions is 10 plus 8 over 6, which equals 3, because it's 18 over 6. And then the other solution is 10 minus 8 over 6,
which equals 1/3. And that ends the practice for quadratic formula. I hope you are feeling a little more confident about that concept. So this ends the discussion. I thought I'd put a little humor on here so I could talk while I was doing this. This ends the discussion on the methods and meanings for quadratic problem solving with factoring and the quadratic formula. Remember, if you have any questions, you can put them in the comments below. I will get back to you and I will help you out. In addition, please subscribe. I would love, if you like this video and want more videos like it, please subscribe and you will be notified when new ones are posted. And I hope you have a good one, and we'll see you on the next video.